Welcome to our video for our tutorial for our mini album. Now, as you can see, it's pretty blank, right? I wanted to show you how to make the form for the mini album. You can make this form at home out of just simple paper that you have at home, which makes it so much easier. You don't have to search the craft stores or the internet or whatever in order to try and buy the right form and the right size and everything else. So you can make this at home and you can make as many of them as you want, so you always can be able to make your own mini albums right from scratch. So the paper that I used is actually the same paper that I use to print the actual paper on, like the pattern papers and the elements and that kind of stuff. So it's that thickness. Now, if you think, well, I'm not sure if that's going to be thick enough, I want something maybe a little heavier, just what's going to end up happening is I'm going to paste my pattern paper on top of here. Before you start making this, take 2 pieces of printed pattern paper or 2 pieces of blank sheets, whatever, put them together, see what you think. See if you think that's thick enough. If not, you could make this from white cardstock. So that's for the paper, what to use, that's kind of where you want to be at. So, as you can see, I put it all together already because I think it's a little easier to show for you. Basically, let's just open this up here for a sec. Let's move some stuff out of the way. The basic form, we're going to ignore this. This is an opening that I'm going to put a waterfall into. So let's just open it up so that we can see what's going on here. But basically, you have 3 pieces of paper and 2 spines. That's going to make your mini album, your basic mini album. So each spine is 1.5 inches wide and 6 3/4 inches tall. Okay? This centerpiece is 6 3/4 inches square. This left side front is 6 3/4 inches tall, 5 3/4 inches wide. And this one is 6 3/4 inches tall and 5 inches wide. So when you fold it up, and I'll put a magnet in here so it'll close nicely. You could use ribbon, obviously there's all sorts of things you can do. I'll probably end up putting a magnet in here. But when you close it up, you can see there is a bit of an overlap there. I kind of like that. Maybe you don't want the overlap, so you could just shrink this down by this 1/2 inch, because obviously, or 3/4 of an inch, sorry, these 2 are 3/4 of an inch difference. You could make these 2 the same size if you wanted to. Okay? So, for the inside, for the waterfall, let's go back to this here. When you glue this together, you want to glue these cover pieces, you want the spine to go over top of it. And the reason is when you end up with a 1/2 inch spine, so with your spines, you score it at 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1/2 inch. So again, each spine is 3/4 inch, the piece of paper is 3/4 inch wide by 6 3/4 inches tall. And then when we score it at 1/2 inch intervals, that gives you the spine so that you have some thickness to it so that you can actually add things to the inside, your photos, all that kind of stuff. When you glue it together, as you can see, you want the spine to be glued on top of this. So that way, when we put our piece of paper on here, we actually cover up the spine. We don't, we won't see it from the end here, because we are going to put a piece of paper here on the spine as well, and things like that. So I think that's the basic for making your basic form, okay? Now when you get into the inside, for this particular one, I've chosen to go with an opening pocket. This is magnetized, okay? And you glue this together, as you can see. I'll flip it over. You glue this on to the back. Again, I'm gluing it on top of my back sheet. So that way when I put my pattern paper, I'm covering up all these seams, okay? In order to make this, the bottom piece here is, let's flip around, is 5.5 inches tall and 6.5 inches wide, okay? And then we score it at 1/2 inch, okay? So we always have a 1/2 inch fold over. So your finished piece will be 5 inches by 6.5, okay? For the top piece that folds down, this is 4.5 inches tall by 6.5 inches wide. Again, we score at 1/2 inch so that we have that gluing strip and the fold over. And so our finished is 4 inches by 6.5 inches. Make sense? When we open this up, I have waterfall pieces already cut, okay? So the waterfall is going to go in here. Again, each of these pieces is 4.5 inches tall, okay? With a 1/2 inch. You don't have to have a 1/2 inch, but I like a little bit more of a gluing strip. That way people don't pull it apart or whatever. But I've left a 1/2 inch here for my gluing strip. 4.5 inches tall total, including the gluing strip, by 6 inches wide. So these are all going to go in here. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So when the waterfall happens, and you'll see that once I show you the finished item, right? These are all going to get glued in here. So then that way your waterfall will have 8 sides to it in order to put photos, journaling areas, whatever it is. That gives you a pretty significant number of areas in order to do this. Now,
so before we begin, I'm going to give you a couple extra tips here in terms of preparatory things you're going to want to do before you actually start affixing all your papers on here. First thing is we're going to want to apply our magnets. So because when we close this up, I'm chosen to use a magnetic closure here. You can choose to use ribbon if you want, and this would be the exact right time also to paste your ribbon onto the back portion before we do all our papers. So you could paste a ribbon onto the back, and then that way when you put your back cover paper on, it covers it up, and then that way you can just have a simple tie across here if that's what you wanted. But if you decide you want to use magnets, here's a simple way of doing it. When you put a magnet on, glue it on to, obviously, to the one end, okay? So there it is, already glued on. Now, in order to find out, I'm just using simple washers, okay? Here is a simple washer, just from the garage, from the, random bin. Before you do it, and you're gonna wanna know, okay, how do I know exactly where to glue it? Just take a Sharpie marker or felt marker, anything, color on top of the magnet, push it down extra hard, hold it there for a second, because it's obviously the marker is wet, and there it is. It leaves you a black dot exactly where you need to glue on your washer, which is going to affix those two once you've put your papers on. Okay? So, number 2 out of 3 things is this is the interior folio that is going to go inside the pocket that we're going to have over here on our right cover. So this is going to go in here. But we need the form for it, just as we needed the form for the mini album. And this is the instructions for the form. Again, you're making the form out of the exact same paper that you're printing all of your finished card on and everything else. So it's the same weight, everything else, right? So your very front piece, you have 3 pieces of paper. Your very front piece is going to be 3¼ inches wide by 5¼ inches. And your other 2 pieces are going to be 3½ by 5¼ okay, these 2 guys, because as you can see here, we've made a 1/4 inch, we've scored at a 1/4 inch from the top and the bottom, right? Folded it over, made a nice crease, because obviously that is a gluing strip. So when we put these together, like so, it's all going to glue together, okay? So you need to just make this folio form first, so that way when you're doing your assembly, you can just keep going. You don't have to stop and do that in the midst of it all. I find it's a little easier to go along that way. The last thing is inside your folder, you are going to see a sheet called an Assembly Image Guideline. That is this, okay? I've created this mini album, and I still can't remember once I've cut everything out on the cutting machine, and I have all these elements sitting here, I can't even remember where they all go. So what I've done is I've laid out, okay, this is the front of the left cover. This is the inside of the left cover. Here's all the center cover pieces, and here's the right cover pieces. You can see how I've dramatically outlined the pieces, which are your elements, which is this guy and this guy. So those go onto the front cover, so that when we have our front cover, we know, oh yeah, okay, so that is kind of how you want it to go on. So this kind of goes in about here, and then the butterfly is going to go in there as well. I'm going to put these up on some foam dots. You're going to see that when I do the assembly. We're going to have a quick assembly speed walkthrough, because you don't really want to sit there watching me glue. It's just going to quickly process through. So that way you can just get a general gist for it, right? But that is the assembly image guideline, okay? And I've just printed that off on simple, photocopy paper, just the cheap paper out of our printer. So that way I can have this in front of me just as a guideline and something to look at as I assemble, to make sure that I have all the right parts and pieces everywhere.